She entered the room nervously, expecting just another interview, until his gaze froze time. The millionaire before her was the first love she had never forgotten. Subscribe to this channel. Leave your comment. Every day we post videos like this. Continuing. The afternoon sun of London cast a golden hue over the skyscrapers as Helen Davis walked through the revolving doors of the imposing building on Regent Street. The modern, minimalist architecture of the building contrasted sharply with her simple life in an East End borough. She adjusted the blazer bought in a sale years before, checked if her discreet makeup was still intact in the elevator's reflection, and took a deep breath. The resume she carried in her folder had been revised dozens of times in recent days. That vacancy as coordinator of the design department at Montgomery Developments represented her last chance before returning to the countryside. In recent months, Helen had tried everything to get back on her feet. After losing her rented apartment, a painful separation, and a long period of unemployment, finding a job compatible with her qualifications seemed impossible. Now, at 32, her brown eyes carried the weariness of someone who had already faced too many storms. 15th floor, the receptionist announced with a practiced smile. The meeting room is at the end of the corridor to the right. Mrs. Patricia is waiting for you. Helen nodded her thanks and walked down the polished marble corridor. Tempered glass doors, contemporary art pieces, and a silence that only money can buy. She adjusted her posture, raised her chin, and tried to ignore the fact that her last savings had been spent on that sober outfit and the shoes that slightly pinched her toes. She could not fail. The meeting room door was ajar. An elegant woman in her 50s with perfectly aligned grey hair in a bob cut greeted her formally. "Helen Davis, I'm Patricia Montgomery, Human Resources Director. Welcome. Thank you for the opportunity. Your portfolio experience caught our attention. We've already spoken by phone, but now we need to assess your profile in person. Our CEO insists on participating in the final interviews. He should arrive in a few moments." The CEO. Helen felt an involuntary shiver. During her research on the company, she had avoided seeking personal information about the owners. She had focused only on the company's values, its completed projects, its work philosophy, a strategy to concentrate on what really mattered. Montgomery Developments was one of the largest architecture and construction companies in the country, with innovative and sustainable projects spread throughout the United Kingdom. Working there would be an unimaginable professional leap, considering her recent trajectory. The door opened completely, and Helen's world stopped spinning. Raphael Montgomery entered the room with the elegant bearing that years had only accentuated. His dark hair now showed strands of grey at the temples, but his green eyes remained as penetrating as sharp blades. His impeccably tailored suit outlined his broad shoulders. It was the same man she had promised 2 years earlier never to seek out again. The same man who had made her swear, between tears and shouts, that she would live her life far from him. The same man she had married in a cold ceremony, due to an agreement that would save her father from prison. Their gazes met like two cars on a collision course. Patricia continued to say something about the company, about processes, about expectations, but Helen couldn't process a single word. Her blood seemed frozen in her veins. Raphael stopped in the middle of the room, as if he had taken an invisible blow. For an instant, just a very brief instant, the mask of the ruthless businessman gave way to genuine surprise. Then his usual coldness returned. "Miss Davis," he pronounced with cutting formality, extending his hand as if they were complete strangers. Helen felt her legs tremble under the glass table. How had she not recognized the Montgomery surname? How had she not made the connection? The answer was simple. Raphael commanded a family business in southern Edinburgh, specializing in shoe exports. What she didn't know was that in the years of her absence, he had expanded his business and bought the development company in London. "Mr. Montgomery," she replied, briefly shaking the hand that had once known every curve of her body. Patricia looked at them both with curiosity but asked no questions. Helen realized that the woman knew nothing, that to the entire company she was just a common candidate, not the CEO's ex-wife. The interview proceeded like a macabre play. Technical questions about experience, about design methodologies, about team management. Helen answered mechanically, hiding the whirlwind of emotions that consumed her inside. Raphael maintained an impassive demeanor, making occasional notes, observing her as if she were a complex puzzle. "We need someone who understands that our projects are not just structures, but materialized dreams," Raphael said at one point, and Helen felt the weight of those words. How many dreams had they built together, only to see them crumble like a sandcastle? When the interview ended, Patricia escorted Helen to the door, assuring her they would be in touch soon. Raphael remained seated, organizing papers with exaggerated concentration. The message was clear. There was nothing personal here, just business. As she left the imposing building, Helen felt the weight of the world on her shoulders. The London sky now displayed shades of grey, threatening a typical summer storm. She walked aimlessly along Regent Street, letting memories flood her mind like an old film being developed. She had met Raphael 5 years earlier at an art exhibition in Edinburgh. She, a recent design graduate, was presenting her final project. He, a successful businessman, was seeking talent for his shoe company's marketing campaign. The encounter had been casual. He was interested in her minimalist illustrations, in the unique style she had developed over years of study. At the time, Helen didn't know that this elegant man in a dark suit carried the weight of a traditional surname and a fortune built over generations. The attraction was immediate, but the social chasm between them was evident. She, the daughter of a local merchant, struggling to keep his doors open. He, the heir to an empire. Professional meetings evolved into discreet dinners, conversations about art, literature, dreams. Raphael seemed fascinated by the way Helen saw the world, by the authenticity in every word, every gesture. When her father was accused of tax fraud, a trap set by a dishonest partner, Helen watched her world crumble. The possibility of seeing her father imprisoned, the small building materials store closed and the house mortgage foreclosed, left her desperate. It was then that Raphael appeared with his proposal, a marriage of convenience. He needed a wife to please conservative investors, to create an image of stability. In return, he would use his influence to resolve her father's legal problems. The ceremony took place on a rainy afternoon, with few guests. The white dress weighed like lead on her shoulders. The rehearsed smile pained her lips. The wedding rings they exchanged felt like golden shackles. On their wedding night, Raphael kept his promise. They would sleep in separate rooms, maintain appearances in public, but nothing more. She had accepted those terms with a mix of gratitude and shame. The first few months were an exercise in theatre, appearances at social events, smiles for photographs, intertwined hands that separated as soon as the doors closed. The mansion in southern Edinburgh was spacious enough that they rarely met. Helen filled her days with freelance projects, trying to keep her career alive while pretending to be the perfect wife of the successful businessman. Until one spring night, something changed. Raphael returned from a business trip earlier than expected and found her crying in the conservatory. He didn't ask the reason for her tears. He simply sat beside her and remained silent. When she finally calmed down, he confessed something he had never said. He also felt alone. He also lived a farce. He also yearned for something real. It was the beginning of a genuine rapprochement. Long conversations during dinner, walks in the garden on Sunday mornings, confidences exchanged during sleepless nights. Helen discovered that behind the calculating businessman existed a sensitive man who loved classical music, who collected first editions of rare books, who dreamed of one day abandoning everything and living simply. The first true kiss happened without planning, without staging, just two bodies gravitating towards each other, finally yielding to the attraction they had tried to deny. The following months were filled with discoveries, growing intimacy, a love that blossomed between the lines of a cold contract. Helen allowed herself to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, the farce had transformed into something real, until she discovered the truth. One afternoon, while looking for a document in Raphael's office, she found the original contract they had signed, before the wedding. Alongside it, a detailed investigation into her father, revealing that Raphael knew from the beginning that the accusations were false, that he had manipulated the situation to create a debt of gratitude, that everything was nothing more than a carefully orchestrated plan. The confrontation was devastating, the words exchanged unforgivable, the feelings torn apart. That same night, Helen left the mansion with only a small suitcase, swearing never to look back. She moved to London, started from scratch, rebuilt her identity far from the shadow of the Montgomery surname. And now, 2 years later, fate placed her face to face again with the man who had broken her heart. Her cell phone vibrated in her blazer pocket, pulling her from painful memories. A text message from an unknown number. "We need to talk. Dinner tonight, 8 p.m., the Ritz restaurant. Raphael." Helen felt her stomach churn. The rain finally poured down on the avenue, forcing her to seek shelter in a nearby cafe. Sitting by the window, watching the drops stream down the glass, she faced the most difficult decision of recent years. Ignore the message and move on with her life, or confront the past she had desperately tried to bury. The coffee grew cold in her cup as she weighed her options. She needed that job. Her rent was overdue. Freelance work had drastically decreased during the pandemic, and financial reserves no longer existed. But working for Raphael meant reopening wounds that still bled. She closed her eyes for an instant, feeling the weariness of years of struggle. When she reopened them, she typed the reply, "I'll be there." The rain continued to fall when Helen arrived at the Ritz. The boutique hotel in Mayfair exuded discreet luxury, with its classic facade and soft lighting. She handed the keys of her borrowed car to the valet, trying to ignore how her simple dress clashed with the elegance of the place. She had chosen something sober, a knee-length black dress, medium heels, her brown hair pulled back in a low bun. Nothing that could suggest any special effort for the meeting. Raphael was already waiting at a discreet table at the back of the restaurant. Seeing her approach, he rose with the impeccable manners his parents had instilled in him since childhood. For a fleeting instant, Helen glimpsed something akin to vulnerability in those green eyes, but soon the expression was replaced by his usual mask of control. "Thank you for coming," he said, pulling out a chair for her. "I'm not here for you," Helen replied coldly. "I'm here because I need this job." Raphael nodded, as if he had expected that answer. He called the sommelier with a discreet gesture and ordered a bottle of red wine without consulting the menu. Helen recognized the brand. It was the same wine they had shared the first time they were truly together, not as part of a charade. "Did you know who I was when you applied?" he asked as soon as the sommelier moved away. "Of course not," she replied, holding his gaze. "I would never voluntarily seek you out. Montgomery Developments didn't have your name at the helm when I researched the company." "I bought the controlling stake 8 months ago," Raphael explained, swirling the wineglass between his fingers. "It was a strategic acquisition. We're expanding into the sustainable real estate sector." "Fascinating," Helen replied with irony. "And now? Are you going to offer me the job in exchange for something? Another contract, perhaps?" The comment hit Raphael like a physical blow. He closed his eyes for an instant as if needing to gather strength to continue. "You have every right to hate me," he said finally. "I won't deny that I made unforgivable mistakes, but the position is yours on your own merit. Patricia had no idea who you were when she selected your resume from hundreds, and after today's interview, she's convinced you're the ideal person for the job." Helen sipped her wine, trying to buy time to organize her thoughts. As much as she wanted to refuse anything from that man, the reality was cruel. She needed the job, the salary, the stability. "What are the conditions?" "None," Raphael replied promptly. "The position is yours, with all responsibilities and benefits. You will report directly to the creative director, not to me. We will rarely meet." "Why?" Helen asked, unable to hide her suspicion. "Why offer me this after everything?" Raphael hesitated, as if measuring each word before speaking it. "Because it's the least I can do after the harm I caused, and because, despite everything, I know talent when I see it." The waiter brought the dishes Raphael had ordered in advance, another gesture that showed how he still remembered her culinary preferences. They ate in silence for a few minutes, each lost in their own thoughts. "Is your father well?" Raphael asked finally, breaking the silence. Helen felt her throat tighten. Her father had passed away 6 months earlier, a victim of a sudden heart attack. Alone she had handled all the funeral arrangements, the sale of the small house to pay off remaining debts, the distribution of his few personal belongings. Raphael didn't know because she hadn't allowed him to know. "He died," she replied simply. "Heart attack." The shock on Raphael's face was genuine. He put down his cutlery and reached his hand across the table, as if to touch hers, but recoiled at the last moment. "Helen, I'm so sorry. I didn't know." "How could you know?" she retorted, fighting back tears. "I cut all ties with you, with your family, with that life." "He was a good man," Raphael murmured, and there was sincerity in his voice. "Despite everything, I always respected him." Helen looked up, staring at him with an intensity that made him recoil slightly. "Despite everything. You manipulated his life, my life, created a non-existent debt, to force me into a marriage that would serve your purposes, and now you want me to believe you respected him?" "Things weren't quite like that," Raphael began, but Helen interrupted him. "I read the documents, Raphael. I saw the investigation you commissioned. You knew my father was innocent from the start." Raphael ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of nervousness in someone always so controlled. "Yes, I knew the accusations were false," he finally admitted. "But it wasn't how you're thinking. I didn't create the situation. I just discovered the truth before you did. And instead of simply telling me, you decided to use it as a bargaining chip. I was in love with you," Raphael said, the words coming out like a painful confession. "From the first day at the gallery. But I knew you would never truly look at me, that to you I was just the arrogant businessman who could help your career. When I found out what they were doing to your father, I saw an opportunity to have you in my life. It was wrong, it was selfish, it was unforgivable. But it wasn't calculated as you imagine." Helen felt as if the ground disappeared beneath her feet. For 2 years she had nourished hatred as a way to survive, as a shield against the pain of lost love. The possibility that the story had nuances she didn't know had never occurred to her. "Why didn't you tell me this before? When we started to—" "Because I was afraid," Raphael completed. "Afraid that if you knew the truth, you would abandon me immediately. And then, when I finally found the courage to confess everything, you discovered the documents first. You only saw fragments of the story and drew your own conclusions. Conclusions I deserved, by the way." The silence that followed weighed like lead. Helen's head spun with new possibilities, with versions of the story she had never considered. But the wounds were still open, the trust broken beyond repair. "The job," she said finally, returning to the initial subject. "I accept the position, but with one condition. We will maintain our relationship strictly professional. No private meetings, no attempts at reconciliation, no reliving the past." Raphael nodded slowly. "As you wish. The contract will be sent to your email tomorrow, along with all the details for an immediate start, if you agree." When dinner ended and Raphael paid the bill, both remained silent until the hotel lobby. The rain had stopped, leaving that peculiar smell of wet asphalt in the air that only big cities know. "May I drive you home?" Raphael offered, indicating the car that the driver had already positioned at the entrance. "No, thank you," Helen refused. "I need this time alone." He nodded, respecting her decision. As Helen walked away towards the taxi stand, Raphael called her name one last time. "I know I promised to keep my distance, and I will. Keep that promise," he said. "But I need you to know one thing. I never stopped thinking about you, not a single day." Helen didn't reply. She got into the taxi with a heavy heart, looking out the window as the city lights created hypnotic patterns on the damp glass. She felt her phone vibrate with the message, confirming the start of her employment contract the following Monday. A new phase was about to begin, a phase where past and present would collide daily, where she would have to live with memories and feelings she had fought to bury. She had accepted the challenge out of necessity, but something within her, a small flame that refused to extinguish, questioned whether there was more to her decision than that. When the taxi stopped in front of the small building in Shoreditch, where she rented a modest apartment, the moon had emerged from the dispersing clouds. Helen looked up at the night sky, taking a deep breath. She would move forward, as she always had. She would face Raphael, face the past, face herself. And this time, if there was any truth to be discovered, she would not run away. The offices of Montgomery Developments buzzed with activity when Helen arrived for her first day of work. The design department occupied the entire 13th floor, with large windows offering a panoramic view of London. The team was young and diverse. 16 professionals, including designers, architects, and sustainability specialists. Mark Vinson, the creative director, greeted her with a genuine enthusiasm that surprised her. "Your portfolio is exceptional," he commented as he guided her through the space. "Especially the urban revitalization projects. It's exactly the vision we need for the company's new phase." Helen smiled, trying to hide her nervousness. She wore a navy blue pantsuit, her hair loose framing her face, discreet makeup enhancing her delicate features. She had spent the entire weekend psychologically preparing for that moment, for the possibility of encountering Raphael in the corridors, for the inevitable questions about how she had gotten the job. But the day passed without incident. She met each team member, familiarized herself with ongoing projects, and received her own workspace with a view of Hyde Park. There was no sign of Raphael, no strange comments. Patricia briefly stopped by to give her an official welcome, but said nothing about any previous connection with the CEO. At the end of the workday, as she was gathering her belongings to leave, Mark stopped by her desk. "The team usually goes to the bar nearby on Thursdays. Nothing formal, just a beer after work. It would be great if you could join us." "Of course," Helen replied, grateful for the welcome. "Thank you for the invitation." Days turned into weeks. Helen immersed herself in work with the determination of someone who has something to prove, to herself, more than to anyone else. Her natural talent quickly stood out. Brainstorming meetings came alive when she presented her ideas. Initial sketches evolved into innovative concepts under her touch. The team, initially cautious with the new coordinator, quickly came to respect her and seek her guidance. Raphael kept his promise of distance. On the rare occasions they met, general meetings, new project presentations, corporate events, he treated her with the same professional courtesy he extended to other senior employees. No more, no less. In the eyes of those who didn't know their shared past, they were just the CEO and the talented design coordinator. But Helen noticed his furtive glances when he thought she wasn't watching. She noticed how he became more formal, more rigid in his posture when she entered a room, how his voice subtly changed when addressing her, small signs that no one else caught, but which for her were as evident as old scars that still ache when the weather is about to change. On a Thursday afternoon, 2 months after her hiring, Helen found herself alone in the project room. She had stayed late, finalizing the details of an important presentation for the next day, a project to revitalize an old factory in East London, transforming it into a mixed-use complex with affordable housing, cultural spaces and green areas. It was the kind of work she was passionate about that gave meaning to her training. "I didn't know you were still here." Raphael's voice startled her. He was standing at the door, his suit jacket slung over his shoulder, his tie slightly loose, signs that he had also had a long day. "I'm finalizing the presentation for tomorrow," she replied, maintaining a neutral tone. "The Matlock Mill project." Raphael approached slowly, as if measuring each step to avoid invading her space. He stopped at a safe distance, observing the plans and renderings spread across the large table. "May I see?" Helen hesitated for an instant, but eventually nodded. She moved slightly away, creating space for him to approach the drawings without them being too close. Raphael examined the material with genuine attention, his brow furrowed in concentration. "It's extraordinary," he said finally. "The way you preserved elements of the original architecture, but created such contemporary spaces. There's a poetry to it." "Thank you," she replied, unable to completely hide the pride in her work. "The investors will love it, especially the housing component. You managed to fit in 40% more units than the original plan, without compromising the quality of the spaces." Helen raised an eyebrow, surprised. "You studied the preliminary project?" A slight smile curved Raphael's lips. I study all important company projects, Helen, and this one has your signature in every line. The comment made her uncomfortable, not because of the observation itself, but because of the intimacy it suggested, as if he still knew her deeply, as if he could still read her intentions through drawings and concepts. Well, it's getting late, she said, starting to gather the materials. I need to rest for tomorrow. Raphael nodded, respecting the cue. May I offer you a ride? It's raining quite heavily. No, thank you. I've already called a taxi. He didn't insist. He walked to the door, but stopped before leaving. Helen, he called, his voice softer. I know I promised to keep my distance, and I'm trying to respect that. But I want you to know that I'm very proud of the work you're doing here. Not as not as someone from your past, but as CEO of this company. You're transforming the design department. Before she could reply, he had already left. Helen remained still for a few moments, her heart beating at an irregular rhythm she hadn't felt in a long time. She took a deep breath, trying to reorganize her thoughts. It was just a professional compliment, nothing more. She couldn't allow the past to interfere with the present she was building with such effort. The next day, the presentation was a resounding success. Investors unanimously approved the project, especially highlighting the social and sustainable aspects Helen had emphasized. Mark spared no praise for her competence, and even Patricia, always so reserved, showed enthusiasm for the results. Raphael remained in the background throughout the meeting, intervening only to clarify financial or strategic issues. At the end, as the investors were leaving with handshakes and promises of new business, he briefly approached. Congratulations, he said simply, extending his hand for a formal handshake. Thank you, she replied, accepting the gesture. The contact was brief, professional, but Helen couldn't help but notice how his hand was still warm, how his fingers still fit perfectly into hers. That night, her colleagues insisted on celebrating the project's success. The chosen bar was relaxed, with live music and an impressive variety of craft beers. Helen let herself be carried away by the festive atmosphere, allowing herself to relax for the first time in weeks. She laughed at Luke's jokes, the graphic designer who always had a funny story to tell, discussed sustainable architecture trends with Camilla, the newly hired environmental specialist, and even participated in a heated discussion about urban policy with Mark and other directors. It was amidst this relaxed atmosphere that she noticed the presence of Renee Vance, the company's financial director, and according to corridor rumors, Raphael's ex-girlfriend. Tall, elegant, with long blonde hair and a presence that commanded attention, Renee watched Helen with an interest that went beyond casual curiosity. So you're the new darling of the design department, Renee commented, approaching with a drink in hand. There was something predatory in her smile. Everyone is talking about the Matlock Mill project. Impressive for someone who arrived so recently. Thank you, Helen replied cautiously. But it was a team effort. We have exceptional professionals in the department. Ah, modesty, Renee smiled, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Always an admirable trait, especially when one rises so quickly in the hierarchy. The comment carried an insinuation. That did not go unnoticed. Helen straightened her posture, looking directly at the woman. If you have something specific you'd like to say, Renee, feel free to be direct. Renee took a slow sip of her drink, studying Helen over the rim of the glass. I just found it curious how Raphael, always so meticulous with high-level hires, approved your name so quickly. Normally, he personally interviews candidates several times before making a decision. Perhaps my resume spoke for itself, Helen countered, maintaining her composure. Or perhaps Patricia was convincing enough in presenting the candidates. Or perhaps, Renee lowered her tone, leaning closer as if sharing a secret, you already knew each other from before. Helen's heart pounded, but her face betrayed no emotion. She had worked too hard to build a solid professional reputation. She would not allow malicious insinuations to tarnish it. If you have any questions about my qualification for the position, Renee, I suggest you discuss them directly with the Human Resources Department. I'm sure Patricia will be happy to show you the selection process I went through, along with 20 other candidates. The firm response seemed to surprise Renee, who recoiled slightly. "Don't get me wrong, dear. I'm not questioning your competence. On the contrary, I'm impressed. Raphael doesn't usually make mistakes about talent." Before Helen could reply, Mark approached, unaware of the tension between the two women. "Helen, come meet the marketing team. They're eager to discuss the Matlock Mill project campaign." With a polite nod to Renee, Helen walked away, grateful for the interruption. But the encounter left a bitter taste. Would this be just the beginning of questions about her rapid rise in the company? How long until someone discovered her past with Raphael? Returning home that night, Helen felt emotionally exhausted. The small apartment in Shoreditch, which she had decorated with such care in recent months, seemed to welcome her as a refuge. She took off her shoes, poured herself a glass of wine, and sat on the small balcony, watching the city lights. Her cell phone vibrated with a message. It was Raphael. "I heard about your encounter with Renee. I'm sorry for any discomfort. She doesn't know about us, but she's always been perceptive. If you prefer, I can clarify the situation with her." Helen reread the message several times, unsure how to respond. How had Raphael found out so quickly about the conversation at the bar? Had someone reported it to him? Or was it just a coincidence? After a few minutes of reflection, she typed, "It's not necessary. I can handle situations like this. I would just like to know how you found out." The reply came almost immediately. "Luke called me concerned. He's a good friend. He looks out for the team. But I respect your decision. Just know that I'm here if you need anything." Helen didn't reply. She locked her phone screen and returned to contemplating the city, her thoughts as jumbled as the lights blinking in the distance. Why did Raphael continue to affect her, even after so much time, even after everything that had happened between them? The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity. With the approval of the Matlock Mill project, Helen took the lead of a special team for its implementation. Meetings multiplied, site visits became frequent, and work nights extended longer and longer. She immersed herself in this routine with gratitude. The busier she was, the less time she would have to think about Raphael, about Renee, about the past that insisted on haunting her. On a particularly hectic afternoon, she received an email from Raphael's secretary, summoning her to a meeting in his office at the end of the day. The subject line simply read, "Matlock Mill Project, Phase 2. Nothing unusual considering her position on the project, but Helen still felt that familiar tension in her stomach. Raphael's office occupied the corner of the top floor, with large glass windows that offered a spectacular view of the London skyline. The walls displayed black and white photographs of old company projects, interspersed with some contemporary artworks. Helen recognized a Vic Muniz, a Baravelli, a small sculpture that appeared to be a Luba. Raphael was on the phone when she entered, but gestured for her to sit down. He ended the call quickly, without rush, but also without prolonging it unnecessarily. "Thank you for coming," he said, getting up to pour 2 glasses of water. "I know you're busy with the implementation of the first phase." "The project is on schedule," Helen replied professionally, accepting the glass he offered. "We had some challenges with the soil, but nothing the engineering team couldn't resolve." Raphael nodded, returning to his chair. "Actually, I didn't call you here to talk about the current phase," he said, leaning back slightly, "but about a possible expansion. Investors are enthusiastic about the concept and would like to replicate it in other areas of the city, perhaps even in other capitals." Helen didn't hide her surprise. "That's unexpected and positive, of course." "It would be a significant leap for the company," Raphael continued, "and for your career too. You would lead the expansion program with a larger team and virtually unlimited budget." The offer was tempting, exactly the kind of opportunity Helen had dreamed of for years. But there was something in the way Raphael observed her, an expectation that went beyond the professional, that put her on alert. "It sounds like an incredible proposal," she said cautiously, "but I presume there's some detail you haven't mentioned yet." A slight smile curved Raphael's lips. "Always perceptive. Yes, there is one condition. The expansion would begin in Edinburgh. We would need you to move there for at least 6 months, to personally oversee the start of operations." Edinburgh, the city where everything began, where the mansion they had shared probably still existed, where every corner, every park, every restaurant held memories of a past she had fought to leave behind. "It's a strategic decision," Raphael quickly added, noticing her hesitation. "Edinburgh has the ideal urban profile to replicate the model, and the city council has already shown interest in revitalizing the old industrial district." "I understand the strategic reasons," Helen replied, "but I need time to consider. It's a significant change in my life." "Of course," he agreed. "I don't need an immediate answer. Think it over calmly. The project wouldn't start for 2 months. Helen stood up, indicating she considered the meeting concluded. Raphael accompanied her to the door, maintaining a respectful distance. When she was already in the corridor, he softly called her name. "Helen, the decision is purely professional. I know it seems like I'm trying to bring you back to the past, but that's not it. It really is an extraordinary opportunity for your career, and you deserve it regardless of, well, everything else." She nodded briefly, not trusting her own voice to reply, and headed for the elevator. As the doors closed, she saw Raphael still standing in the same spot, watching her with an expression she couldn't decipher. The apartment was silent when Helen arrived. She tossed her bag onto the sofa, took off her shoes, and went straight to the bathroom, where she filled the bathtub with hot water. As she undressed, questions swirled in her mind like a whirlpool. Was it really just a professional decision? Was Raphael using the project as a pretext to draw her back into his old world? And, even more disturbing, why did a part of her feel tempted not only by the career opportunity, but by the possibility of revisiting the past? She sank into the perfumed water, closing her eyes and trying to empty her mind, but memories invaded her without permission. The day she met Raphael at the art exhibition, the first dinner when he invited her to work for his company, the glances exchanged during meetings, the conversations that extended beyond the professional, and then the proposal, the marriage of convenience that would change their lives forever. The ceremony had been discreet, just close family and a few intimate friends. Helen wore a simple, classic-cut dress that Raphael had insisted on giving her. To keep up appearances, he had said, but he had chosen something that perfectly matched her style. Her father had walked her down the aisle with tears in his eyes, not of joy but of guilt for having put her in that situation. Raphael waited with a solemn, almost distant expression, as if it were just another deal to be closed. The first few months were exactly as they had agreed, a well-rehearsed charade. They smiled for photographs, attended events together, maintained the fiction of a happy couple. Behind the scenes, they lived separate lives under the same imposing roof. Helen tried to ignore how much his presence affected her, how her heart raced when she unexpectedly encountered him. In the mansion's corridors, Raphael, in turn, seemed increasingly distant, burying himself in work, avoiding moments alone with her, until the night of the storm. A violent storm had knocked out power across southern Edinburgh. Helen was alone in the mansion. Raphael had travelled on business, and the staff had already retired to their quarters at the back of the property. With only a few candles to light her way, she wandered through the dark rooms, trying to find more blankets to ward off the intensifying cold. It was then that the front door abruptly opened, bringing a gust of wind and rain into the hall. Raphael appeared drenched, his suit ruined, his face exhausted. He had managed to return to the city before the airport closed, but his car had broken down a few blocks from the mansion, forcing him to walk through the torrential rain. Helen rushed to him with a towel, helping him dry his face and hair. There was something vulnerable in the way he shivered from the cold, how he allowed her to care for him without his usual barriers. She led him to the library fireplace, lit with the last stock of firewood, and poured him a glass of whiskey to warm him. Sitting side by side on the Persian rug, illuminated only by the flickering firelight, they talked as they never had before. Raphael spoke of his lonely childhood, of his father's overwhelming expectations, of the constant fear of never being good enough. Helen spoke of her passion for art, of the sacrifices she had made to study, of how her father had always been her safe harbor. Hours passed, the whiskey in the decanter lowered, and the barriers between them began to crumble. At one point, Raphael gently touched her face, as if he were looking at something fragile and precious. "Why did you accept this marriage, Helen?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Why did you agree to live this lie with me?" "You know why," she replied, holding his gaze. "To save my father, to protect him. Was there no other solution? Someone who could help him without demanding this?" Helen shook her head slowly. "We tried everything, lawyers, loans, even some friends. No one could or wanted to get involved, and then you appeared with your proposal. And you hated me for it." The question hung between them like a taut rope about to snap. "No," Helen finally replied, her voice almost a whisper. "I never hated you, Raphael. Only what you represented, the power you had over me, over us." Something changed in his expression, a glint of understanding, of recognition. That night, when their lips met for the first time without witnesses, without contracts, without motives other than pure desire, both knew that nothing would be the same. The kiss, initially hesitant, deepened with an urgency that had been repressed for months. Hands explored bodies with reverence and desperation. The storm outside was just an echo of the one raging inside them. They made love right there on the library rug, the fire shadows dancing over their naked skin, whispers and moans mixing with the sound of the rain. And afterward, as they lay embraced under an improvised blanket, Raphael confessed something that would change everything. "This was never an agreement for me, Helen. From the first day, from the moment I saw you in the gallery, I knew. I knew you were the one I had waited for my whole life." His words shocked her, but not as much as the subsequent revelation. "The accusations against your father. I found out they were false even before I proposed marriage. I could have helped him without asking for anything in return. But I was selfish. I wanted you in my life no matter what, even knowing you didn't love me." The confession struck like lightning, illuminating truths Helen was not prepared to face. She stood up abruptly, wrapping herself in the blanket, her mind spinning with implications, with possibilities, with the enormity of the lie that had defined her life in recent months. "You manipulated everything," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Everything was a farce from the beginning." "No, Helen," Raphael stood up too, reaching for her. "What I feel for you was never false. It's the only truth in my life." But she recoiled, her trust broken like a vase thrown against the floor. In the weeks that followed, everything changed. The marriage that was already a farce became a minefield of contradictory emotions. Helen oscillated between the desire to forgive and the inability to trust. Raphael, between desperate attempts to win back her heart and the remorse that consumed him like a slow poison. It was then that Helen discovered her pregnancy. A life, growing inside her, a child conceived on that stormy night of intertwined truths and lies. The doctor confirmed it with a smile, unaware that the news would bring not only joy, but also an ultimatum. That same night, Helen confronted Raphael with the positive test. She expected to see hesitation, perhaps even rejection. After all, a baby had never been part of the agreement. But his reaction surprised her. He fell to his knees before her, hugging her waist, his face pressed against her still flat belly. When he looked up, his eyes were tear-filled. "A family," he murmured, his voice choked. "A real family. Helen, I know I don't deserve it. I know I betrayed your trust, but please, allow me to try and fix everything. Allow me to be the man, the husband, the father you both deserve." His words were sincere, his desperation genuine, and for a brief moment, Helen allowed herself to imagine that possibility, a new beginning, a chance to transform the lie into truth. But then, doubt whispered in her ear. What if he was manipulating the situation again? What if the child was just another way to keep her trapped? It was. Then that she made the most difficult decision of her life. In the dead of night, while Raphael slept, Helen packed a small suitcase. She left a brief letter on the nightstand, explaining that she needed time, that she couldn't raise a child in a relationship based on lies, that he had destroyed any possibility of trust. She promised to contact him when the baby was born, to ensure Raphael could meet his child, exercise his paternity. But she couldn't continue living under the same roof, pretending that the past didn't matter. The next morning, when Raphael awoke to the emptiness beside him in bed, When he read the farewell words with eyes blurred by tears, an entire world collapsed. He searched for her desperately, hired detectives, activated contacts across the country, checked hospitals and clinics. But Helen had vanished like smoke in the wind. What he didn't know, what she herself would only discover weeks later, was that fate had decided for both of them. A searing pain in the middle of the night, a taxi rushing to the emergency room, the doctor's words sounding distant as if coming through a tunnel. "I'm so sorry, but the baby, we couldn't save the baby." The loss was an abyss Helen crossed alone, in a hospital room in London, a city large enough to disappear, far enough to rebuild herself. When she was discharged, she was physically recovered, but emotionally devastated. She couldn't gather the strength to tell Raphael. How could she announce the loss of a child he hadn't even met? How could she open that wound, only to inflict more pain? So, she simply moved on. She found a small apartment, took freelance jobs, spent her days creating and her nights crying for everything she had lost. Until, 2 years later, fate brought Raphael back into her life through that job interview, and now he invited her to return to Edinburgh, to the setting where everything had begun. The bathwater had cooled when Helen emerged from her memories. She dried herself mechanically, put on comfortable pajamas, and sat at the small kitchen table with a notepad. She began to list the pros and cons of Raphael's proposal, trying to approach the decision rationally, professionally. Pros: career advancement, expanded responsibility, professional recognition, better salary, opportunity to leave a significant urban legacy. Cons: returning to the past, possibility of reopening emotional wounds, facing painful memories, proximity to Raphael, uncertainty about true intentions. When she finished the list, she realized that the professional side clearly won. But there was something more, something that could not be reduced to words on a piece of paper. There was fear, not just of Raphael or the past, but of herself, of her own feelings, of her own capacity to forgive, of her own vulnerability. She slept an uneasy sleep, populated by fragmented dreams where Raphael sometimes appeared as the manipulator who had deceived her, sometimes as the broken man who had begged for her forgiveness. She awoke to the sound of rain beating against the window, a distant echo of that night in the mansion's library. At the office, Helen kept busy with consecutive meetings, project revisions, and schedule adjustments. She avoided thinking about Raphael's offer, about the implications of a return to Edinburgh. When the workday ended, she declined her colleague's invitation for a happy hour and headed to the parking lot, eager for the refuge of her apartment. It was then that she found Renee, apparently waiting for her between the cars. "We need to talk," the financial director said without preamble, approaching with determined steps. "About you and Raphael." Helen felt her blood run cold in her veins. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Please," Renee rolled her eyes impatiently. "Let's save time and pretense. I found out everything. The marriage, the escape, the lost baby, everything." The revelation hit Helen like a physical blow. She instinctively leaned against the nearest car, trying to process the information. "How?" "I have my sources," Renee replied with a calculatedly casual shrug. "But that doesn't matter. What matters is that the entire board will know at the next meeting if you accept the Edinburgh proposal." "Is that a threat?" Helen asked, regaining her composure. "Blackmail?" "Call it what you want," Renee smiled, a cold smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm just warning you about the consequences. Imagine the scandal. The CEO's ex-wife hired without anyone knowing about their shared past, now leading the company's most important project. Shareholders will love that story." "We didn't do anything wrong," Helen countered, her voice firm despite her racing heart. "There was no conflict of interest in my hiring. I was selected on my own merit, and my work proves it." "Perhaps," Renee conceded with a dismissive gesture. "But the appearance of impropriety would be enough to tarnish your reputation and Raphael's." "What do you gain from this, Renee?" Helen asked, studying the other woman's expression. "What is your objective?" Something in the question seemed to hit a raw nerve. Renee's mask of coldness wavered for an instant. Raphael was about to offer me a partnership when you showed up, she said, her voice betraying a contained bitterness. Years of work, of dedication to this company, thrown away because he can't think clearly when it comes to you. Even after everything you did, even after abandoning him when he needed you most. Helen closed her eyes for a moment, assimilating the implications. So that was it. Professional jealousy masked as moral indignation. Renee, you're mistaken. Raphael and I have only a professional relationship now. The past is behind us. Don't lie to me, Renee cut in, moving closer. I've seen how he looks at you in meetings, how he lights up when you enter a room, how he follows your every move. That's not the past, Helen, and he's ruining this company because of you. You need to talk to Raphael about this, not me, Helen replied, keeping her voice controlled. Your complaints are with him, not with me. Don't be naive. I spoke with him. Do you know what he said? That you are the greatest talent the company has hired in years. She mimicked Raphael's voice with disdain. As if anyone believes that lie. We all know why you're here. Helen stared at Renee for a long moment, absorbing not only her words, but the thinly veiled desperation behind them. The woman was not just jealous, she was afraid. Afraid of losing her position, her power, everything she had, built over the years. Do what you deem necessary, Renee, she said finally, unlocking her car with a click of her key fob. Reveal what you've discovered, if it brings you some peace. But know that, regardless of what happens, I will continue to do my job with the same dedication and competence, because that's what I know how to do. That's who I am. Without waiting for a reply, Helen got into her car and drove off, leaving Renee standing in the parking lot. On the way home, her mind was buzzing with possibilities and decisions. One thing was clear. She could no longer postpone her answer to Raphael. She needed to face the past once and for all. Upon arriving home, she picked up her cell phone and typed a simple message. We need to talk. Tomorrow, after work. My apartment. The reply came almost immediately. I'll be there. The rain that had fallen all day had given way to a fine mist when Raphael parked his car in front of Helen's building. The tree-lined street in Shoreditch was silent. Only the occasional sound of a passing car or the distant bark of a dog broke the quiet. He remained a few minutes inside the vehicle, staring at the small building where she lived. It was so different from the imposing mansion they had shared in Edinburgh, simple, unpretentious, welcoming in its own way. He took a deep breath before getting out, adjusting his dark blazer over his white shirt. He had opted for more casual attire than his usual business suits. In his right hand, he carried a folder with documents. In his left, a small package he hesitated to bring, but ultimately decided not to leave in the car. The doorman announced him via intercom, and Helen buzzed him up without hesitation. During the brief elevator ride to the 4th floor, Raphael tried to calm his racing heart. 2 years had passed since they were last alone in a private space. The night she left, leaving only a brief letter on the nightstand. 2 years of searching, of unanswered questions, of a pain that had become something dense and permanent in his chest. The door to apartment 42 was ajar when he reached the floor. He knocked softly anyway, respecting her territory. Come in, Helen's voice called from inside. The apartment was small but carefully decorated. The white walls displayed some watercolors Raphael recognized as her work, urban landscapes, everyday scenes, anonymous faces captured with unique sensitivity. The living room, integrated with the open-plan kitchen, was cozy, with a 2-seater sofa, a reading armchair, low bookshelves filled with books. Plants scattered in the corners brought life to the environment. It was a place that reflected her personality, unpretentious, authentic, welcoming. Helen stood by the window that overlooked a small balcony. She wore jeans and a light blue sweater, her hair pulled back in a casual ponytail. She looked younger, almost vulnerable, far from the professional demeanor she maintained at the office. Thank you for coming, she said, indicating the armchair for him to sit. Would you like anything? Coffee, tea, water? Water, please. The simple request eased some of the tension. Helen moved to the kitchen and Raphael took the opportunity to place the folder on the coffee table. When she returned with 2 glasses, he settled on the sofa, maintaining a safe distance between them. Renee approached me yesterday, Helen began without preamble, always as direct as Raphael remembered. She found out about our past, the marriage, the separation, everything. Raphael closed his eyes for an instant, absorbing the information. I should have anticipated this, he said finally. Renee always had a special talent for uncovering secrets. What exactly did she say? That she will reveal everything to the board if I accept the Edinburgh proposal, Helen replied, keeping her gaze fixed on him. That it will ruin my reputation, and yours too. A muscle twitched in Raphael's jaw, the only visible sign of his irritation. She's scared, he explained after a moment. She always wanted to be a major shareholder in the company. When I bought the development company, in London I promised to re-evaluate the possibility after the first year, but I recently made it clear that's no longer my plan. Because of me? The question hung in the air, like fragile crystal. Raphael didn't avert his gaze. Partially, he admitted. Not because we started seeing each other again, but because your vision for the Matlock Mill project made me re-evaluate the company's future. I realized we need innovation, a human touch, not just the financial efficiency that Renee represents. Helen absorbed the information in silence, processing the implications. She said you've been acting differently since I arrived, that you don't think clearly when it comes to me. A sad smile curved Raphael's lips. She's right about that. I've never thought clearly when it came to you, Helen, from the very first day. The confession disarmed Helen momentarily. She looked away towards the window where the soft mist blurred the city lights. We can't go back to the past, Raphael. I know, he replied, leaning slightly forward. I'm not asking for that. I'm just being honest about how I feel. I've always been terrible at it, as you well know. A silence settled between them, not uncomfortable, but laden with unspoken meanings. Raphael finally held out the small package he had brought. I brought something for you. It's not a gift, exactly. It's more a return. Hesitantly, Helen accepted the package. Opening it, she found an oval silver locket. When she pressed the small clasp, it opened, revealing a miniature photograph, her father, smiling, beside her at her college graduation. You left it behind when you left, Raphael explained softly. I know how much it meant to you. I kept it hoping to one day return it. Helen felt her eyes sting with unshed tears. That locket had been a gift from her father when she turned 18, a simple object, with no significant material value, but laden with memories. She had thought she had lost it forever. Thank you, she whispered, closing her fingers around the precious object. About the baby, Raphael began, his voice slightly trembling. I tried everything to find you. I hired detectives, checked hospital records, scoured every possible lead. When I finally found out you were in London, almost 18 months had already passed, so I decided to wait for you to contact me when you felt ready. Helen swallowed hard, the lump in her throat almost preventing her from speaking. I lost the baby 2 weeks after leaving Edinburgh, she finally said, the words coming out brokenly. It was a miscarriage. The doctors said it happens, that there isn't always an explanation. I wanted to call you, I wanted you to know, but how could I? After everything, after leaving that way. Raphael closed his eyes, absorbing the pain of that revelation. When he reopened them, they were tear-filled. I'm sorry you went through that alone, he said, his voice hoarse. I would never have let you face that moment without support, regardless of anything between us. I know, Helen admitted, surprising herself with the certainty in those words. I always knew, deep down. That's why I couldn't call you. Because I knew you would come immediately, that you would leave everything behind for us. And I wasn't ready for that level of commitment, for that truth. Not after discovering how everything started between us. Raphael extended his hand across the table, not to touch hers, but as a gesture of openness. The beginning was wrong, Helen, I won't deny that. I manipulated the situation, created conditions, to have you in my life. It was selfish, it was unforgivable. But what came after, what grew between us, that was real. At least for me. Helen studied his face, the deeper lines around his eyes, the first grey hairs at his temples, the features she knew so well and yet seemed different now, marked by experiences they hadn't shared. For me too, she finally admitted, and that's what made everything harder, discovering that something true had been born from a lie. Raphael nodded, understanding. That's why I never tried to force a reconciliation when I finally found you, he said, because I understood that some things, once broken, cannot simply be fixed. They need to be rebuilt from scratch if there's a chance. Helen felt something stir within her, an understanding, a possibility she hadn't considered until then. Raphael had changed. She had changed. Perhaps time and distance had not only opened wounds, but also created space for growth. The Edinburgh proposal, she said, returning to the initial subject. Is it really just professional? Raphael didn't hesitate in his reply. It's a legitimate opportunity which you deserve for your talent. The company needs someone with your vision leading the project, but it would be a lie to say that I didn't also think about the possibility of rediscovering who we are now, away from the mistakes of the past. The honesty was refreshing. Helen appreciated the transparency, something that had been lacking at the beginning of their relationship. And what about Renee? Her threats? Raphael picked up the folder from the table and opened it, revealing some documents. I've already resolved that issue, he said, handing the papers to Helen. This is an official communication that will be sent tomorrow to all directors and board members. It explains our prior history and clarifies that your hiring was done by Patricia without my interference. It also includes all performance evaluation reports since your arrival, proving your professional merit. Renee can try to create a scandal, but we will be ahead of her. Helen examined the documents, impressed by the thoroughness and frankness. There was no attempt to hide the past, only to contextualize it appropriately, separating the personal from the professional. You had already prepared this even before you knew about Renee, she stated. It wasn't a question. Yes, because I always knew that one day the truth would come out, and I didn't want it to harm your career or your reputation. Helen returned the documents to the folder, feeling simultaneously protected and respected by that gesture. I still haven't responded about Edinburgh, she said, getting up to pour more water. The intensity of the conversation demanded movement, demanded space to organize her thoughts. I know it's a difficult decision, Raphael commented, watching her. Not just professionally, but because of the meanings the city holds for us. Helen returned to the sofa, sitting a little closer to him this time. I'm scared, she admitted, her voice low. Not of you, not of the project. I'm scared of myself, of allowing myself to feel something that has hurt me so much before. Fear is valid, Raphael replied softly. I'm scared too, of messing everything up again, of not being worthy of the second chance I don't even know if exists. There was a raw vulnerability in his words that touched Helen deeply. The Raphael she had known years earlier would never admit fear or insecurity. The man before her was different, more honest with himself, more open about his own flaws. If I accept the project, she began, measuring each word, I need you to understand that it will be a professional fresh start before anything else. If anything else happens between us, it will have to grow naturally, without pressure, without expectations. A genuine smile lit up Raphael's face. Not the calculated smile of the businessman, but the rare, true smile Helen had seen only a few times during their marriage. It's more than I could hope for, he said simply. The moment was interrupted by Helen's phone ringing. Checking the screen, she frowned. It's Mark, sorry, I need to take this. The conversation was brief, but Helen's expression turned to concern as she listened. When she hung up, her face was serious. Problems? Renee called an extraordinary board meeting for tomorrow morning, she explained, her voice tense. Mark just got the word. The official topic is review of recent hirings, but he suspects it's about me. Raphael nodded, showing no surprise. She's acting faster than I imagined, he commented, picking up his phone. I need to make some calls. Helen watched as he dialed numbers, spoke briefly with different people, gave precise instructions. It was Raphael, the businessman in action, focused, strategic, resolute. When he finished the last call, he seemed confident. We'll be prepared, he assured her. Patricia is sending all the details of your hiring process to the board members tonight. Joseph Henry, the chairman, is already aware of the situation and agrees there's no real conflict of interest. And Mark just confirmed he'll present the impressive results of the department under your leadership. Helen felt a wave of gratitude for these people she barely knew, but who were willing to defend her professional competence. "Thank you," she said sincerely, "but I'm still concerned about how this will affect my position in the company. Even without a formal scandal, the rumors will always exist," Raphael completed, understanding her concern. "In any company, in any circumstance, the question is whether we allow them to define who we are and what we can achieve." Helen reflected on those words, recognizing the truth in them. Throughout her career, she had fought against subtle prejudices for being a woman in a predominantly male industry. She had always needed to prove her worth repeatedly, while male colleagues were accepted on the premise of competence. "You're right," Raphael continued, reading her thoughts. "It will be harder for you than for me. It always is. But I know your work, Helen. I know what you're capable of. And if you decide to stay, we'll face this together. Professionally speaking." The hurried addition made her smile, despite the tension of the moment. Raphael had always been careful with words, always precise in his statements. Seeing him correct himself, trying to respect the boundaries she had set, was strangely moving. "Let's go to that meeting tomorrow," she decided, straightening her shoulders. "And after that I'll give you my answer about Edinburgh." Raphael stood up, understanding that the conversation had reached a natural pause. "May I pick you up tomorrow?" he offered. "It would be appropriate for us to arrive together, presenting a united front." Helen considered the proposal. "Yes, I think that would be appropriate." He walked to the door, stopping before opening it. "Helen, regardless of what happens tomorrow or what you decide about Edinburgh, thank you for tonight, for allowing me to be here, for talking honestly. Thank you for returning the locket," she replied, touching the small object that now rested in her pocket. "It means more than you imagine." When the door closed, behind Raphael, Helen remained still for a few minutes, absorbing everything that had been said and, more importantly, everything that had been felt during that conversation. Something had subtly changed between them. It wasn't reconciliation, not yet, but perhaps the beginning of a deeper, more mature understanding. She walked to the small balcony and watched Raphael's car drive away down the misty street. Her heart beat at a strange rhythm. It wasn't the painful pounding she had felt for so long when she thought of him, nor the coldness she had tried to cultivate as protection. It was something new, something for which she didn't yet have a name. The next morning dawned clear and cold, one of those London winter days when the sky is an almost painfully intense blue. Helen woke before her alarm, after a surprisingly peaceful night's sleep. She dressed with special care, opting for a well-tailored dark grey suit, her hair pulled back in a low bun, discreet but impeccable makeup. The image reflected in the mirror was of a professional, confident, prepared woman. The insecure girl who had once accepted a marriage of convenience had been left behind long ago. Raphael arrived promptly at 7:30. He was elegant in his usual dark suit, but Helen noticed he had chosen a blue tie she had given him years ago. A small detail, probably unconscious, but one that spoke volumes. "Ready?" he simply asked when she opened the door. "Ready," Helen confirmed, picking up her folder and bag. The drive to the office was silent, not from awkwardness, but from shared concentration. Both mentally reviewed strategies, prepared arguments, anticipated possible scenarios. When they arrived at the company parking lot, Raphael turned off the engine but made no move to get out. Immediately. "I wanted you to know," he said, looking directly at her, "that no matter what happens in there, I'm proud to work with you, as a professional, as a person." The sincere compliment warmed something inside Helen. "Thank you. I'm also proud of what we've built here, of what the company is becoming." They rode the executive elevator together, arriving on the 20th floor, where the main meeting room was already buzzing with directors and board members. Patricia immediately approached, handing them both a folder with documents. "All the data you requested," she discreetly informed them. "The chairman has already been fully briefed and seems calm about the situation." Helen thanked her with a nod, while Raphael briefly placed a hand on her back. an almost imperceptible gesture of support, but one that conveyed reassurance. Mark, the creative director, also approached, bringing performance charts for the department since Helen's arrival. Renee was already seated at the table, surrounded by two older board members who seemed engrossed in her conversation. Seeing Helen and Raphael enter together, her face hardened momentarily before she resumed her usual professional expression. The meeting began promptly at 8 o'clock, with Joseph Henry Mason, the board chairman, taking the floor. "Good morning, everyone. We have been called for an extraordinary meeting by the financial director, Renee Vance, to discuss what she classifies as a potential conflict of interest in recent hirings. I give her the floor to present her concerns." Renee stood up with the confidence of someone who had won many corporate battles. Impeccably dressed in a dark red suit, she projected authority and determination. "Thank you, Chairman. I am here today to bring to the attention of this board a situation that I consider concerning for the governance of this company," she began, her voice modulated to convey genuine concern. "Approximately 3 months ago, we hired a coordinator for the design department, Ms. Helen Davis." Helen felt all eyes briefly turn to her, but she maintained a neutral, professional expression. "What was not disclosed to this board," Renee continued, "is that Ms. Davis and our CEO, Raphael Montgomery, have a significant personal history. In fact, they were married for almost 2 years in Edinburgh before Raphael's move to London." A murmur went through the room, quickly silenced when Joseph Henry raised his hand. "Ms. Vance, I have been aware of this information since last night when I received a full communication from Mr. Montgomery himself," the chairman intervened, "including the hiring process conducted by the Human Resources Department without direct interference from the CEO. What exactly is your concern?" Renee seemed momentarily destabilized, but recovered quickly. "My concern, Chairman, is that this undisclosed prior relationship may have influenced important company decisions, including the recent proposal for expansion to Edinburgh, which would be led by Ms. Davis." "I understand," Joseph Henry nodded, turning to Helen. "Ms. Davis, would you like to comment?" Helen felt her heart race, but her voice came out firm when she spoke. "Thank you for the opportunity, Chairman. Yes, Raphael and I were married in the past. I did not mention this fact during my selection process because, frankly, I did not consider it relevant to my professional qualifications. I was interviewed and selected by Patricia Montgomery, HR Director, and by Mark Vinson, Creative Director, without any participation from Raphael." She paused, allowing the words to be absorbed before continuing. "As for the Edinburgh proposal, it is a project with its own merit. Based on the success of the Matlock Mill concept we developed here in London, I am considering the offer exclusively on its professional merits, not for any other reason." Joseph Henry nodded, satisfied with the direct answer. He then turned to Raphael. "Mr. Montgomery, as CEO, do you acknowledge that you should have informed the board about this prior connection at the time of hiring?" Raphael maintained eye contact without hesitation. "Yes, Chairman, I do. It was a failure on my part, motivated by the desire not to interfere in the selection process. I wanted to ensure that Helen, Ms. Davis, was evaluated solely on her exceptional talent, without any perception of favoritism, but I take responsibility for the omission and apologize for it." The sincerity of his response seemed to please the board. Joseph Henry briefly consulted his notes before continuing. "Director Patricia, please, could you confirm that the selection process followed all usual protocols?" Patricia stood up, professional as always. "Yes, Chairman. The process was conducted exactly like all others for coordination positions. Ms. Davis competed with 23 other candidates, went through 4 phases of selection, including technical tests and interviews with different evaluators. Her hiring was based exclusively on merit." "And Director Mark," Joseph Henry continued, "how do you assess Ms. Davis's performance since her hiring?" Mark offered a genuine smile before responding. "Exceptional, Chairman. In just 3 months we have managed to finalize projects that had been stagnant for years. Department productivity has increased by 42%, as shown in the charts I distributed. The Matlock Mill project under her leadership has become a national benchmark in sustainable urban revitalization." Renee seemed increasingly uncomfortable. realizing her strategy was not working as planned. "Chairman, my concern is not with Ms. Davis's competence, which I acknowledge to be considerable," she tried again. "It is with the appearance of impropriety. With the message we send when personal relationships can be perceived as influencing corporate decisions." Joseph Henry considered the argument for a moment. "A valid concern," he finally conceded, "and for that, I thank you for your diligence, Director. The governance of this company must always be transparent and ethical." Renee smiled, sensing a victory was near, but the chairman continued. "However, after reviewing all the documents presented, I see no evidence of improper favoritism or decisions detrimental to the company's interests. On the contrary, the results under Ms. Davis's leadership have been remarkable." He turned to face the entire board. "I propose the following course of action. First, we will formally record the personal history between the CEO and the coordinator for full transparency. Second, we will establish that any decisions directly involving Ms. Davis will be approved by an independent committee, not solely by the CEO. And third, the Edinburgh project will be evaluated on its own merits, with a detailed feasibility analysis to be presented at the next ordinary meeting." The proposal was accepted unanimously, with Renee discreetly abstaining. When the meeting was adjourned, the directors dispersed quickly, some casting curious glances at Helen and Raphael, but no one daring to make direct comments. Renee left first without speaking to them. Helen sighed with relief as the door closed behind the last board member. "That went better than I expected," she commented to Raphael, who remained by her side. "Joseph Henry has always been a fair man," Raphael replied, "and pragmatic too. He knows how to recognize talent and results." Helen gathered her documents, feeling a mix of exhaustion and relief. "I guess I should prepare for the stares and whispers over the next few days." "It'll last a week at most," Raphael assured her with a half-smile. "Soon some other corporate gossip will take its place. Perhaps the suspicious dealings of the Argentine subsidiary or the marketing director's affair with the controlling assistant." The comment drew an unexpected laugh from Helen. "You always knew all the rumors, didn't you?" "It's my job to know," he replied, his smile widening. "Managing people means understanding not just what they say officially, but what they whisper in the corridors." They walked together to the elevator, a new complicity hanging between them after facing that challenge together. "About Edinburgh," Helen said when they were alone in the cabin, "I accept the proposal." Raphael turned to face her, not hiding his surprise. "Are you sure?" "Yes," she affirmed with conviction. "It's an extraordinary project, a unique opportunity. It would be foolish to refuse out of fear of the past." His smile was genuine, lighting up his green eyes in a way Helen had almost forgotten. "The company will be lucky to have you leading the expansion," he said simply, maintaining a professional tone despite his evident satisfaction. When the elevator doors opened on the 13th floor, Helen hesitated before stepping out. "Perhaps we could have dinner tonight to discuss the project details." Raphael nodded, understanding what wasn't being said, that this dinner would also be a first attempt at rediscovery, a small step towards what could be, not what had been. "Of course. I'll have my driver pick you up at 8. The following weeks were a whirlwind of preparations for the transfer to Edinburgh. Helen dedicated herself to forming the team that would take over the projects in London in her absence, to finalizing pending matters, and to alignment meetings with the new partners in the north. Raphael maintained a respectful professional distance at the office, but the dinners to discuss the project became regular, gradually evolving from strictly professional encounters to more personal, more honest conversations. On one of these evenings, sitting in a discreet restaurant overlooking Richmond Park, Raphael surprised Helen with an unexpected question. "The mansion in Edinburgh, would you like to see it again?" Helen slowly put down her fork, pondering. "You still keep it, after all this time?" "Yes," he admitted. "I couldn't sell it. Or perhaps I didn't want to sell it. It's an important part of my life despite everything." Helen felt the weight of those words. The mansion where they had lived was not just a valuable property. It was the setting of their shared past with all its complexities. "I don't know if I'm ready for that," she replied honestly. "There are too many memories there." "I understand," Raphael nodded. It was just a thought. You'll have a corporate apartment near the new office, obviously. Comfortable, convenient. Helen reached for his hand across the table, the first voluntary contact since they had reunited. Thank you for understanding, she said softly. Perhaps one day, but not now. We need to build new memories first before revisiting the old ones. Raphael intertwined his fingers with hers, the simple contact sending an electric current through both of them. New memories, he repeated, like a promise. No lies this time. No lies, she agreed. The move to Edinburgh happened on a sunny September morning. Helen watched from the airplane window as the city unfolded below, the Firth of Forth shimmering under the sun, the green parks, the historic buildings mixed with modern architecture. It was strange to return as a different person, transformed by years and experiences. Part of her feared the ghosts she might encounter there. Another part, growing larger each day, yearned for the possibility of redemption. The revitalization project advanced quickly in the first few months. The local team responded enthusiastically to Helen's vision, and municipal authorities offered unrestricted support when they saw the first results. Raphael traveled frequently between London and Edinburgh, personally overseeing the development of the work, and, although he never openly admitted it, also seeking those precious moments with Helen away from corporate scrutiny. It was during one of these visits, 6 months after the project began, that Helen finally accepted the invitation to visit the old mansion. The driver dropped them off in front of the imposing iron gates, and for a moment she hesitated, memories assaulting her like a whirlwind. "We can leave if you prefer," Raphael offered, noticing her discomfort. Helen took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "No, I want to do this. I need to do this." The property was exactly as she remembered it. The impeccably maintained gardens, the central fountain murmuring softly, the imposing facade with its classical columns. But there was something different too, something she couldn't immediately identify. "I had some rooms redecorated," Raphael explained as he opened the main door, "to make it less heavy." The interior revealed the change Helen had sensed as she approached. The dark tones that had predominated before had given way to lighter, livelier colors. Contemporary paintings replaced the sober artworks on the walls. The old furniture remained, but reorganized to create more welcoming, less formal spaces. "It's different," she commented, her eyes sweeping the living room. "Lighter." "Like us," Raphael replied simply. They walked through the rooms slowly, each reliving their own memories while creating new impressions. The library where they had first grown close during the storm, the conservatory where Helen used to draw on Sunday mornings, the office where Raphael had spent countless nights working, often just to avoid facing the reality of their marriage. When they reached Helen's old bedroom, she stopped at the door, uncertain. "I turned it into a studio," Raphael said, opening the door carefully. "I thought the space deserved light, creativity." The room had been completely modified. The now white walls reflected the natural light streaming in through the large windows. An easel occupied the center of the room, surrounded by tables with painting materials. On the shelves, art books replaced the novels Helen used to read before bed. "It's beautiful," she whispered, genuinely moved. "I thought perhaps when you have time you might use this space," Raphael suggested hesitantly, "to create, to express yourself." Helen turned to him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Why did you do this? Why did you keep everything, transform everything, even without knowing if I would come back?" Raphael approached slowly, giving her time to recoil if she wished. When she remained in place, he took her hands in his. "Because I needed to believe in new beginnings," he replied sincerely. "Because even in the darkest moments when you had left, and I didn't know if I would see you again, something inside me insisted that our story hadn't ended. Not that way." Helen felt her heart pound with those words. In recent months, they had carefully rebuilt a relationship, first professional, then a cautious friendship, and finally something deeper, more significant, but always with the shadow of the past hanging between them, never completely exorcised. "I'm scared," she admitted in a whisper, "of repeating the same mistakes, of hurting each other again." I'm scared too, Raphael confessed, but I've learned that fear shouldn't stop us from trying, from risking, from believing. Slowly, as if any sudden movement could break the spell of the moment, Raphael leaned towards her. His lips met hers in a delicate, hesitant kiss, like a silent question. Helen responded by deepening the contact, her hands rising to cup his face. When they parted, breathless and moved, Raphael rested his forehead against hers. "I'm not asking for promises," he said softly. "Just a chance. To do things differently this time." Helen closed her eyes for a moment, letting the emotions wash over her without resistance. The fear was still there, but now it shared space with something stronger. Hope. The hope that two broken hearts could together create something whole and true. "A chance," she agreed, opening her eyes to meet his. "One day at a time." That night, as the moon illuminated the mansion's gardens, Helen and Raphael sat on the balcony with glasses of wine, talking as they hadn't in years. They spoke of past mistakes, of wounds that were still healing, of dreams they had abandoned and new ones they were beginning to cultivate. There were no more secrets between them, no half-truths, no subtle manipulations. Just two people who had lived long enough to value honesty, above all else. "You know what's funny?" Helen commented, watching the stars. "When we got married, it was by contract, a cold, calculated agreement. And now, years later, we're here because we choose to be, because we want to be." Raphael smiled, intertwining his fingers with hers. "Perhaps we needed to walk this entire path to get here, to learn that true love isn't born from contracts or obligations, but from daily choices, from forgiveness, from growing together." Helen leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling a peace she had forgotten was possible. "A long path," she agreed, "but perhaps worth it in the end." In the months that followed, the revitalization project transformed not only Edinburgh's urban landscape, but also the lives of those involved. The old industrial district gained new colors, new spaces, new energy. Low-income families received dignified apartments. Local artists found galleries to express their creativity. Children gained parks where before there had only been deteriorated concrete. Helen and Raphael built their relationship with the same care, the same attention to detail they dedicated to the project. There were difficult days, of course, moments when old insecurities resurfaced, when the past seemed to weigh more heavily than the present. But there were also shared laughs, confidences exchanged in the early hours, small discoveries about themselves and about each other. On a spring afternoon, almost a year after the project began, Helen found herself in the mansion's studio, working on a large canvas, a gift for the inauguration of the cultural complex that would be the heart of the revitalization project. The brush glided over the canvas with confidence, capturing the city's transformation in vibrant colors and precise strokes. Raphael watched from the doorway, not wanting to interrupt her concentration. Only when she paused, stepping back to evaluate her work, did he approach, embracing her from behind. "It's wonderful," he commented, admiring the painting. "Like everything you create." Helen smiled, relaxing against his chest. "The mayor asked for something that represented the spirit of the project. I hope I've captured that." "You captured it perfectly," Raphael assured her. "Renewal, hope, the future built on the foundations of the past." Helen turned in his arms, accidentally staining his white shirt with blue paint. "Oh, sorry," she exclaimed, trying to wipe the stain. Raphael laughed, holding her hands to stop her from rubbing it further. "Leave it. It's just a shirt. A very expensive Italian shirt," she corrected, biting her lip. "Which now has even more value," he replied, kissing her softly, "because it carries your mark." Helen felt her heart expand with those simple words. This was how it was between them now. Small everyday gestures laden with deep meanings, mundane moments transformed into declarations of love. "I have something for you," Raphael said, stepping back to take something from his pocket. "It's not a ring, don't worry, not yet." The "not yet" hung between them like a silent promise. Helen watched as he pulled out a small blue velvet box. When he opened it, it revealed a delicate key-shaped pendant. "It's the original key to this house," he explained. "I had it made into a pendant. Not for you to live here again, not like before, but so you know you'll always have a home here, if and when you want it. On your terms, not mine." Helen touched the pendant with reverence, understanding the deep symbolism of the gesture. It wasn't an attempt to bring her back to the past, but an invitation to create something new, something freely chosen. "It's perfect," she whispered, turning so he could place the pendant around her neck. The cold metal against her skin was a tangible reminder of how far they had come, how much they had grown. The following week, the inauguration of the cultural complex brought together authorities, the press, and the local community. The building that had once housed a polluting factory now shone with its renovated architecture. The original bricks preserved and highlighted, the interior spaces redesigned to house galleries, classrooms, a small theatre. In the center of the main lobby, Helen's painting occupied an entire wall, visually telling the story of the city's transformation. During his speech, the mayor called Helen to the stage, publicly recognizing her contribution not only to that specific project, but to a new vision of an inclusive and sustainable city. Amidst warm applause, she briefly thanked him, shifting the focus to the team that had made it all possible. Her eyes met Raphael's in the front row, proud, moved, full of a love that no longer needed to hide. Later, at the small party that followed the ceremony, they found a moment of privacy on one of the terraces. The city stretched out below, them dotted with lights that reflected in the Firth of Forth like fallen stars. "I'm proud of you," Raphael said, offering her a glass of champagne, "of what you built here, of what you represent." Helen smiled, accepting the drink. "We built it together, as it should have been from the beginning." A comfortable silence settled between them, the kind of silence that only exists between people who no longer need to fill every moment with words, who have found comfort in each other's simple presence. "You know what else I like about us now?" she asked softly. "That there are no more contracts, no agreements, no obligations, just choices. Choices we make every day with our eyes open, knowing exactly who we are." Raphael kissed her temple tenderly. "And we will continue choosing day after day. Because true love is not a document signed once, but a decision renewed every dawn." Under the starry sky of Edinburgh, two souls who had lost and found each other again sealed that silent promise of honesty, of respect, of a love built not on illusions or manipulations, but on the solid foundations of truth. A love that, like the city around them, had been reborn from the ashes of the past, stronger, more authentic, more real than they had ever imagined possible.